Great. Good morning, everyone. We're just gonna let a few people come on in, and then Oliver will take it away.
Thanks, Alicia. So about a minute or so, everybody, just gather around, get yourself settled in, get your cup of coffee, and we have pretty much everybody on our side lined up and ready to go. And again, for those of you who are not aware, this is being recorded. Give it about 30, 45 seconds more. I see people still joining. So with that, let's get ourselves rolling here. So first of all, thank you all for joining the Michigan Alliance for Grid Mobility Advancement, or MAGMA Advisory Council meeting. I'm Oliver Gross, MAGMA Governing Board Co-Chair. MAGMA is convened by the Workforce Intelligence Network. It's comprised of automotive OEMs, manufacturer, tier ones, suppliers, industry stakeholder groups, as well as other members, as you know, from various academic and industrial partnerships. Just for those of you who are like regular to the advisory board, welcome. Those that are new, especially a welcome. One thing I wanted to inform all of you about is that we'll be doing things a little bit differently in 2027. What we're beginning is just an annual single administrative fee, which would cover all the meetings. So $100 per year. We have 4 of these meetings that we regularly have for the advisory council. These sessions will convene where you can, register for the entire year. And so that will allow you to access all of the various meetings that we will have on that. So with that little bit of an administrative item aside, let's get on to it. So on behalf of the MAGMA Governing Board, I'd like to thank and welcome our moderator and panelist speakers. So today, the MAGMA Advisory Council meeting is going to feature a national policy that is influencing regional competitiveness, the state of Michigan's first maritime strategy, and how evolving automotive technologies and propulsion systems are reshaping manufacturing workforce needs. So I have the honor of introducing our esteemed moderator, Frank Adkinar, Schoolcraft College Mobility Sector Liaison. Frank was the global director of powertrain and vehicle thermal systems of Ford Motor Company until December 2022. He has held several global roles in product development, manufacturing, and strategic planning. Frank has also held leadership roles in Europe and Asia Pacific, which included launching several powertrains in new and existing manufacturing facilities in South America, China, India, Thailand, and South Africa. In Asia Pacific, Frank was director of powertrain, leading the growth of powertrain across Asia Pacific markets. Frank has been developing the mobility program at Schoolcraft, workforce development organization, in collaboration with the Electric Vehicle Center at the University of Michigan. Mr. Adkinar graduated from Oakland University with a Master's of Science in Mechanical Engineering. He also earned a Master's of Business Administration from the University of Michigan. And from that, I'd like to welcome Frank.
Thank you, Oliver. I hope you guys can all hear me well. We get it started. It's really my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lisa Krusemark, and she is the research scientist at the Center for Automotive Research. Currently in her role at CAR, she conducts research for automotive industry and public sector initiatives, concentrating on the impact of automotive technology shifts on manufacturing and workforce development. Lisa has led national, state, and regional research projects that focus on identifying critical job, skills, and training needs related to the changing automotive propulsion system, manufacturing, and advanced vehicle technologies, a very important topic in today's environment. Prior to joining CAR, Lisa held roles as an academic researcher and faculty member in psychology and neuroscience. So with that, Lisa, why don't you kick us off with the first presentation? Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, and everybody can hear me and see my slides this morning. So great to be here. Thanks to Win and MAGMA for having me today. I'm really excited to join you all and share a couple of things from CAR. We cover our automotive industry updates and some recent work that we've been doing in collaboration with the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, looking at workforce needs for the auto industry in Michigan. So we know that we are experiencing in the auto industry so many shifts that really have a dynamic impact on both the vehicle technology, manufacturing, and then how that translates to workforce needs. So we're really excited to share some of those findings. Many of you are probably very familiar with Leo's Michigan Automotive Workforce Hub. So I'm excited to share some of those findings with you all today. So just an overview of what I'll talk about. First, I will provide some of our car industry investment updates. So we look at these capital investments from automakers and suppliers as a signal of historical trends in terms of where things have gone, the scale of those investments, as well as how that's dedicated to new technologies and responding to externalities in the market. Next, I'm going to review the zooming in a little bit more to the US and to Michigan, looking at the impact of these capital investments on jobs, in particular new job announcements, as we see this as another signal of growth and direction to be able to translate that and think about workforce needs. And then lastly, as I mentioned, I'll talk about our collaborative work with Leo and the workforce needs assessment that we've conducted. And with that, I'll jump into auto investment trends. So just a little background about CAR, if you're not familiar with the Center for Automotive Research, we are an independent nonprofit research organization located in Ann Arbor. And the research that I'm sharing today is part of a regular program that we release. Typically, we refresh this monthly and quarterly for industry partners. And so what you see today is a snapshot of some of those data. So research is the core of our operation here. Much of it is very economic focused. And so the graph you see in front of you, some of you may be familiar with this. When we zoom out and look at automotive investment, this is really specific to automakers in North America over time. And the breakdown here over time represents investments for capital facilities. So that what that translates to are new facilities, updates, retooling, and reinvestment. So when you look at this, it's also broken out by US, Canada, and Mexico. So we see that distribution over time. And what I would point out here too is the sawtooth pattern that we see over time. Much of that really corresponds to the UAW contract negotiation years when you see peaks in investments around 2011, 2015. 2019 and 2023. There's also an increasing trend in investments over the last 5 years where we see these are investments in the billions of dollars. So the scale of these auto industry investments has really trended upward, and some of that is boosted by policy at the national level in the US. Policies like the IIJA and the IRA have really influenced that. So when we zoom in within North America, we can see this distribution of investments across Canada, US, and Mexico. And we see that within the US, the larger share of those investments are coming from US automaker investments. So that's about 74% of those investments attributed to the US, with about 16% in Canada and almost 10% in Mexico. And so this is really tied to specifically the last 5 years. We see this growth in investments that largely is driven by electrification-related investments. Again, that scale of investments has really ticked up. Notable in 2025, nearly all of the dollars announced by automakers landed in the US. So there were about $31 billion of investments announced just in the US alone in 2025. And a lot of that can be attributed to specific automaker announcements. So for example, Hyundai announced $26 billion through Hyundai Steel to support automotive and robotics. GM announced $4 billion supporting some EV, but predominantly ICE pickup trucks and SUV production. Stellantis similarly announced $2 billion to support continued ICE production in the US, and Ford has made recent announcements supporting their ICE vehicle lineup, and recently announced a $2 billion project to support new production for midsize electric pickup truck. So when we see these investments, I think we'll dig deeper into this, but this is represented across both ICE propulsion technologies as well as more electrification related technologies. When we look at this investment among automakers across the US, we look at this state by state. So you see across the country, Georgia in particular in the last 5 years has captured about 17% of these investments. And we see that pattern of investment across the US is not only strong in the Midwest, but also in the Southeast. So a number of large investments by automakers across the Southeast, including Hyundai in Georgia, Kia as well in West Point, Georgia. There's a Toyota battery plant investment near Greensboro, North Carolina, as well as new investments for Scout Motors and VinFast in North Carolina, as well as Mercedes, Toyota, Mazda, and Hyundai in Alabama. So we see a great deal of investment taking up in that southeastern region. Nonetheless, Michigan really captures nearly 15% of the investment in the last 5 years across the US. So over time, originally it was the case that we think of the Midwest as the heart and the hub of all automaker investments, and that still is the case. Nonetheless, that growth into the southeastern region, we can see over time. We see that, as I mentioned, Georgia has shown on the right-hand side, you see that trajectory of growth in investment by automakers in the Southeast. We know that some of that is related to new facility investments, as well as new investments with new plants that have been developed. So when we look at the distribution of investment from 2015 to 2019, on the left-hand side, the majority of that was within the Midwest, and now that's starting to shift more and balance toward southeastern US investments as well. So both of those regions being very strong in automaker investments. So when we look at supplier investments, so these are tier 1, tier 2 supplier also announced capital investments across North America. We see a very similar distribution and pattern over time in terms of billions of dollars announced. The largest share of this in navy blue going to US suppliers. We also see where that spike occurs around 2022 following the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the IRA policy announcements. We also see where Mexico investments start to increase around that same time. So in 2025, if we start to look at that a little bit more deeply, we saw that about $11 billion in the US were invested by suppliers there, and a roughly equal split between Canada and Mexico last year. Some of the top supplier investments last year were also supporting steel production. ArcelorMittal in Alabama, also focusing on electrical steel, and many large investments by suppliers tend to be tied to rare earth magnets and battery materials supply chain. So those are extremely large investments. So a lot of that scale we see in the last 5 years can be attributed there. So when we break this down across North America, again, this is supplier announced investments just the last 5 years, the majority of that going to the US. And In contrast to the automaker investments, Mexico's taking nearly 19% of the share of those supplier investments over the last 5 years, and a lot of this being driven by nearshoring closer to the US market. So USMCA is having some bearing on this, and we know that that's up for renegotiation this year. But Mexico has been working to strategize and build a deeper tier 2 and tier 3 supply capabilities, particularly with EV battery components, aluminum casting, electronics, and software systems, as well as lightweight materials. So when we look at this distribution across the US, we see, again, the Midwest and Southeastern US states taking a large majority in this case over the last 5 years. As of January in 2026, we see Michigan leading in supplier announced investments since 2020. We also see that the Southwest and the West Coast investments have really started to take hold, and much of that is related to also larger battery-related investments, particularly California, Nevada, and Arizona. So when we think about investment, another way that we cut this up and we start to look at it, so I'm switching back to looking at automaker investment. I want to briefly touch on this related to electrification, because the changing vehicle propulsion technologies really are having significant impact when we think about the type of technology and manufacturing impact, the costs associated with that, and the workforce needs that are really tied to those shifts with vehicle technologies. And so when we look at this and we track this at CAR, we tend to separate the announced investments, tying that to internal combustion engine related technologies. So that's what's in navy blue, versus electrification related technologies, which includes battery electric vehicle, as well as other propulsion systems like hybrid electric vehicle, plug-in hybrids, or battery related technology. So that's what is shown in green in those bars. So what you see on the green line here represents the share of electrification related investments each year, and that percentage. So you see how that has continued to rise. And when we look at this starting around 2021, we see that about 80% of automaker investments are tied to electrification related projects. So really significant proportion of those investments going toward battery electric vehicles, hybrid electric vehicles, and that shift in propulsion technology. So I mentioned many of the automakers that have been making some of those investments, particularly last year. When we think about that, I know you see in 2025, this distribution between electrification and ICE-related technologies is starting to balance out a little bit more. You see a larger share of the internal combustion engine-related investments, and a lot of that having to do with federal policy agenda shifts and that balancing back towards internal combustion engines. So when we look at this for suppliers, very similar pattern. What I would point out here, again, over time, is that share of electrification investments. We see that spike in announced investment after the policy enactments around 2021, 2022. This is largely attributed to the rise in gigafactories and large-scale production when we think about battery components and battery materials. So again, that balancing is starting to take shape again in 2025. So we see that proportion of total investments, again, not as much driven by federal policy incentives to invest more, also though really balancing between those propulsion technologies. So we see that ICE-related technology proportion really start to increase again. So one thing I want to point out again too, many times we think about these technology shifts from a propulsion standpoint from the vehicle side. And of late in this last year, we know that the EV uptake has really been thought to have slowed. If we think about it that way, it was slower than originally forecasted. I think originally, 5 years or so, we expected there to be about 50% market share by the end of 2030 for battery electric vehicles. And I think that type of target we have to keep in mind in terms of what historical trends have also showed us with other propulsion systems. So if you think about hybrid electric vehicles, if you take that timeline and you think about the history of hybrids in the market, you're thinking about hybrids that came into the US market around 1999, 2000. If you think of the Honda Insight in 99 and the Toyota Prius that came out in 2000, this is about a 25-year trajectory for hybrid electric vehicles in the US market. And right now, we look at that market share for hybrid electric vehicles is around 12%. So if you put that into perspective with the expectation for battery electric vehicles, I think some of that right sizing and forecasting, we could think about that in terms of what a reasonable expectation might be for battery electric vehicles in this market. It's not just policy driven, but it's also driven by consumer choice. It's also driven by what it takes for that shift to start to occur over time. So just want to point that out. Nonetheless, we still see in this graph where we're starting to see that battery electric vehicle market share continue to rise in the green bars, and plug-in hybrids to some extent, but that rise in hybrid electric vehicle market share continues to increase. So now I want to transition over to talk about the impact of these auto investments on jobs. And in particular, I'm going to zoom into Michigan. I think that many of us are residents here and very invested in seeing how all of the industry shifts are forming the need for new workforce, how many new jobs really can be attributed to many of these investments when we're thinking about facilities. So with that, this is another way that we look at these investments and the impact on jobs. So there are two ways that we track this. One is how many jobs are retained related to these types of capital investments by automakers and suppliers. In this case, what you see are just new job announcements. So over time from 2009 through about Q3 in 2025. So again, we break this out to electrification related investment and jobs, as well as internal combustion engine or non-EV related job announcements. So the takeaways here you see on this slide really have to do with the number of announcements that were tied to automakers from Michigan during this time period. So a total of 122 new capital investment announcements were shown here, and that translates to about 55,000 new jobs over this time period. So over the course of about 15 years, and about half of these jobs, when you look at this in totality, these have been linked to electrification related investments, but you see that distribution is really leaning towards electrification in the last few years. Michigan's automaker investments and new jobs represent about 22% of the US new jobs announced by automakers in this time period. So while Michigan might be in about second place in terms of total dollars invested, Michigan leads in terms of market share for new job announcements in these areas. And since 2022, so about the last 3 years, automakers have announced about 17,000 new jobs in Michigan. About 50% of those jobs are tied to electrification. When we look at this in terms of supplier announced investments and new jobs in Michigan, these announcements during that same time period, so 2009 to 2025, this has been linked to over 69,000 new job announcements. About 25% of these new jobs have been attributed to Michigan in particular, when we look at this across the US in totality. And about a quarter of these new jobs are tied to electrification across the whole time period. But as you see in the last few years, that proportion toward electrification jobs has really increased as well. So when we take all of this together, we think about this, Michigan really has been experiencing a lot of the industry shifts. I think they're at the forefront in terms of a state and the impact of these dynamic technology shifts. It does have a huge bearing on the way that the industry is shifting around a lot of the changes. And so we tend to bear the brunt of those shifts first. That's what happens when you're at the forefront of what is happening in the industry space. It also really requires a lot of attention towards what is changing in terms of workforce needs. So what I would like to share next is a little bit related to what we've been working on in collaboration with Leo. This is part of the work that we've been doing for the last year or so in relation to the Michigan Automotive Workforce Hub. So really excited to share some of these findings. Many of you may be also involved in the Workforce Hub efforts. There are 3 working groups tied to that. So some of what I'll share today are some of those changing skills needs. And we are part of the Michigan Auto Workforce Hub Data and Coordination Working Group. There are 3 of those working groups in operation right now. And we worked in collaboration with Leo as well as the Michigan Center for Data and Analytics and the Upjohn Institute to work on this labor and workforce report that's going to be published this year. So there were 3 parts to what we worked on in collaboration with these groups, the last of which is what I'm going to focus on today. So we did zoom in and look at expected sales and production for Michigan and how that impacts jobs and growth in the state. We also looked at these automotive investments, much like what I just showed you on the slides before, thinking about the historical trends and where things are going in terms of forecasted expectations for jobs. And then we also engaged with employers across the Michigan auto supply chain to get feedback about what is important for employers in terms of workforce needs. So that last part of the assessment was carried out by our team. We conducted interviews and surveys with Michigan employers across an extended auto supply chain over the last few months, and we looked at 6 different areas of need. So you see that on the slides here. We focused in on industry shifts and jobs impact. So what industry shifts are impacting hiring, what upskilling needs exist for current employees, what hiring challenges are being experienced by these employers, skills gaps, roles in current demand and those in demand in the next few years, as well as the policies needed to help state thinking about new job needs. And let's see. So what I'm showing you here is the extended auto supply chain. So we tried to take a really broad approach to this and talk to employers, not just at the automakers and tier 1 suppliers, but in these upstream manufacturing sectors that you see on the left-hand side of the graph, and then those downstream businesses when we think about vehicle sales, parts, dealers, maintenance and repair, as well as logistics. So we want to get feedback from the whole supply chain to get a representative sample, because I think when we think about workforce, it tends to be concentrated around automaking, assembly, parts production. There's so many dimensions to our supply chain that we really wanted to get feedback across these areas. So some of the takeaways here that we found from this assessment, I'll try to touch on here. One, I think we wanted to test some of the assumptions that the EV transition are central to workers, central to employers in terms of what is impacting workforce needs, but not assume that that's at the top of the list. So we started broadly thinking about what industry shifts are impacting businesses now and what is most impactful in terms of hiring in the near term. So in the next 1 to 3 years, what industry shifts are really impacting your hiring needs? On the left-hand side, this goes to the top 5 industry shifts that employers find to be impactful right now. So the top of that list being around economic factors, EV transition, federal policy shifts, global competitiveness, and workforce preparedness. So workforce always being in that top of mind. And then in the middle, these are some of the shifts that employers are starting to think about for the next 1 to 3 years. So in the future, what is impacting your hiring needs? What is impacting your business? So we see EV transition rising to the top here, along with artificial intelligence, the need for infrastructure development. So this is specific to electrification, policy shifts, the changing workforce demographics, and changing production volumes. So this around being tied to changing vehicle technology shifts. And then looking ahead, we also asked employers whether or not they think of these industry shifts as representing more opportunity or having more challenges tied to them. So those on the left-hand side tied to opportunities, really go back to automation and advanced manufacturing, EV transition, collaboration between industry and academia, and policy driving domestic manufacturing. And then the challenging shifts in the near future going back more towards the economic and policy areas. So a couple more slides on the results, and then I'll turn this back over to Frank. So some of the things I mentioned, we talked to employers about upskilling needs and expectations around skills gaps in the near future. So on the left-hand side, the graph you're seeing is representing the number of employers saying that their current workforce need to update their skills. So if you take that together, what we see is that most of the Michigan auto employers we spoke with expect that they don't have a huge majority of employees that need to have update their skills per se. Some of them do, but when we start to look at future needs in terms of skills gaps, the employers really start digging more deeply, seeing a little bit more need going forward. So expecting those issues in terms of skills gaps to become a little bit more apparent in the next few years. So that breakdown on the right-hand side shows the upstream businesses, core auto being auto assembly and tier 1, and then downstream businesses. So all of which are expecting some skills gap issues to start occurring, and that distribution being a little bit more significant in the downstream sector. What we see on this graph here really goes to those specific skills in demand. So I think when we're drilling down to this and thinking about employer needs and aligning this with education and training opportunities, want to dig deeply into these skills needs. So this is more of a broad brush in terms of top skills needs that we found across all of these sectors, but we also looked at this by the different segments, upstream, core, and downstream. And what you see on the graph on the left, many of the skills in this list, so this is the top 10 list, many of these really go to technical skills. So starting with number 2, automation and robotics, advanced software and programming capabilities, production equipment testing and analysis, mechanical systems, and on down the line. What's interesting, though, for the top skills in demand were that these were related to soft skills. So this being attributed to things like problem solving, critical thinking, and working with a group, and communication with teams. So when we look at the need for new roles, this also goes back to what extent is this a current issue? Are employers developing new roles as a function of new technology needs? Shifts in auto industry, or are they keeping the same roles and requiring new skills? So on the left-hand side, what we see, generally speaking, is that right now, most employers don't expect to be developing new roles, but in the future, they do expect to be developing new types of roles, and we break this out by the segment and industry. So we see a mixture of technician needs, engineers, software and app developers. So a lot of this going back to digital skills, AI, automation capabilities. And so this is also a little bit of a disparity between what's happening now and what is expected in the future. And so I believe this is the last content slide, and then I'll turn it over to Frank. So again, related to workforce needs, what we're seeing on the left-hand side are the proportion of businesses seeking new credentials among their new hires. And again, most employers not necessarily expecting that their new hires are going to need new credentials per se. When we break that down by different sectors on the bottom left, we see that the downstream employers are expecting a higher number of new credentials in those new roles. And then on the right-hand side, we see some of those very specific credentials and capabilities that auto businesses and employers are really looking for across those different segments. So just some quick takeaways. We're really excited to have the opportunity to do this workforce assessment in collaboration with Leo, Upjohn, and MCDA. I think what we found really have a lot to do with these shifting technology needs across the state. That contrast between what is needed now versus the future really points to the fact that we have an opportunity for education and training to align well with industry. We know that it takes time for those workforce needs to be addressed with training and curriculum development. But I think what we see here is a combination of what is expected in terms of industry shifts, but also some of the surprising things around need for more technical skills, more digital skills, and more soft skills among our Michigan workers. So thank you so much for letting me join you this morning. I'm going to turn it back over to Frank.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for sharing your results of your study and also sharing your insights on this. It's amazing when you look at some of your charts because those of us who are interested in the automotive segment, we hear about these announcements month after month. But when you actually captured it in time domain, the enormity of it shows over the last 5 years. So with that, I want to kind of ask a few questions that I think are related to this. The first one is around the technology. Now, with all the shifts that are taking place, what technology trends do you see that the automakers and suppliers are prioritizing over the last year and possibly in the next couple?
Yeah, great question. So some of those things I mentioned with automakers, much of that is that balancing of propulsion technology needs. So when we see that in the investments, we saw that it's not quite a 50-50 split in terms of technology trends. When we think about electrification and internal combustion engine related investments, but it's close. And when we spoke with employers about this anecdotally during the workforce needs assessment, we really heard a lot from employers. And again, these are employers and businesses across the supply chain, not just the large automakers and suppliers, but the smaller businesses too. Many of them are still very much steeped in internal combustion engine related technology. Nonetheless, everyone is hyper aware of technology trends and what is changing. And so I think what we see is the larger businesses having a little bit more of that forecasting capability to think about what is changing. Nonetheless, in the supplier space, many people still need skilled workers for internal combustion engine related technology. So many of them are hiring people back that have ICE related skills. But all of them talked about AI and automation. All of them talked about need for digital skills and capabilities, whether that goes to basic and advanced programming capabilities or implementing AI for administrative or operational purposes or manufacturing capabilities. So AI is on the minds of all employers across the state. I think what is challenging is to think about how that can also be implemented, how to start working with AI, how much to invest, and to what extent that should be right-sized for a business's needs and where you should be looking for some of those skill sets. So I think when it translates to technology, that's one thing that isn't necessarily specific to auto or one sector, but it's certainly on the minds of all of these employers and needs to be thought about when we're talking about training capabilities.
Thanks. It kind of leads me to the workforce and your result of your study on what the automotive companies are emphasizing on. Was any of that surprising to you?
I think when we spoke with employers, one of the things that was surprising was that they're not necessarily developing these new roles per se, that they're not necessarily all looking for a new set of credentials, but that they are shifting many of their current employees around in terms of need, trying to make them more flexible within their businesses, and that interdisciplinary capabilities are really highly valued right now. So that's a more conservative approach if you think about it from a hiring perspective, that people are trying to retain their employees right now. Maybe they're not hiring quite as many, but they're trying to make sure that they have a place and that they can serve multiple roles, and they can be flexible to meet the flexible needs of these auto businesses. So when we think about that from an outside perspective for workforce training, I also think that translates to having a flexible, transferable set of skills that, you know, are not so specialized to just one area, but that make people very marketable across different types of jobs too.
Yeah, that's very important. I'm hearing that when I talk to some of the companies that we deal with. You also touched on the transition. We have seen it, a huge transition, especially in EV, ICE to BEV kind of transition that was primarily policy driven. How does this impact hiring expectations for automotive employers, especially in the next few years, as we think this transition is going to at least stick around for the next 2-3 years?
Right. I think it's creating a lot of uncertainty. I mean, let's acknowledge the fact that it makes it very difficult to plan and know how to invest in not only the products and services being delivered by these different types of businesses, but also how do you invest in what workforce you really need? It's people are trying to hedge this and trying to think about not only the proportion of those workers that have a very specific set of skills. Are they flexible to be able to shift in between different types of jobs that may correspond to different propulsion technologies? Can they toggle between those areas, or are they really mutually exclusive? So it introduces a lot of uncertainty when it comes to that. That's really hard for many businesses, regardless of how big you are, and how much time you have to spend on that. That's a tricky challenge to navigate. So understanding, excuse me, understanding what that market demand starts to look like, thinking about what contracts are changing. I think a lot of projects have changed. Some of these platforms for vehicles are shifting. What we're seeing is that balancing back towards more internal combustion engine or some of the other types of propulsion technologies. So when we think about EREVs, a lot of these things translate to new systems, and bring in different types of skill sets. So it's a really tricky time to be able to plan that accordingly. I think it's a big challenge right now. Nonetheless, I think that's where the market insights can be helpful. But at the same time, the communication between industry and education is really key too.
Yeah, thanks. There's a question in the chat from Stacy from SAE, and this kind of ties into what you ended with. What are the top 3 skills that training providers can focus on to support the Michigan workforce?
Yeah, great question. Stacey, I'm going to see if I can jump back to that slide in terms of these skills. So again, this is kind of cutting across all of those Michigan industry sectors. But if we drill down, so soft skills being over and above a really key thing. And I think not everyone thinks about training for soft skills, but it kind of is inherent to the work that you do. Sometimes that is sticky knowledge that's shared amongst mentors. It might be part of training that happens. It's not necessarily a structured curriculum development, depending on where you're going for your education and training. But we look at these other technical skills. We see automation and robotics really rising to the top. So automation becoming more and more important regardless of where you sit along the supply chain. Advanced software and programming skills. So again, not specific to one sector in particular, but having digital capabilities. So the ability to understand what software needs are, having some basic and more advanced programming capabilities translates to many, many jobs. And then production equipment testing and analysis. So being able to work with different types of equipment, that is calibrating it, installing it, maintaining it, troubleshooting, really, really key skills for a lot of areas. And then if we continue down the line, mechanical systems, assembly and servicing. So a lot of these areas, making sure to be supporting manufacturing processes and equipment.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for a great presentation and also sharing your insights with us. With that, we'll move to our second presenter today, who is Simon Bélisle. He's the Great Lakes Policy Specialist with Office of the Great Lakes of the Michigan Department of Environment. His work includes managing the Michigan Great Lakes Protection Fund, supporting regional and binational policy work, and developing cross-agency collaborations around the maritime strategy and many other topics related to our cherished Great Lakes. With that, I'd like to, Simon, why don't you get us going and with the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. If somebody can confirm they're seeing the correct slides and hearing me, that would be wonderful.
Yep. I can see
Excellent.
everything.
Thank you.
And hears very well.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Again, my name is Simon Bélisle, and I do work for the Office of the Great Lakes, which is part of the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Thank you to Win and MAGMA for having me this morning, and thank you to Lisa for this very interesting presentation. I don't get to work very much in the auto industry, so I feel like I'm intruding into this group a little bit, but hearing all of those stats and all that made me particularly proud of driving an EV that was assembled in Michigan. So if anybody wants to guess what I drive, you can put it in the chat. So anyway, I'm here to talk about the Michigan Maritime Strategy, and very happy to be discussing this. Before we go any further, I just want to talk just a little bit about my office. This office was created in statute in 1985, and I put on the slide a few excerpts from the statute. And what we can see is I put in blue the main reason why we're leading the development of the maritime strategy is as we're charged with promoting the wise use of ports of the state and the wise use of Great Lakes water transportation. So that is the main reason why we're working on this. And I also want to point out that the Office of Great Lakes is not a regulatory office. So our main work is to build bridges and collaboration between programs within our agency, between other state agencies, and with other levels of government, academia, and industry and nonprofit. And that's the type of coalition that led to the development of the maritime strategy. Change here to the next slide. There we go. So if we can talk for a minute about what is the maritime sector in Michigan. It is vital to the state's economy. You can see the numbers here. We're not at auto industry numbers, but it's still a very important part of our state, and it's using assets that nobody else has in the world, which is our Great Lakes. And so when we're talking about 33 active ports, 57 million tons of cargo, and approximately 4.7 billion into the state's economy, 17,000 jobs. That's just on the commercial side. So we're seeing more of the talking about more of the bigger freighters, and you can see on the left side of your screen. We also like to have fun in the water in Michigan, so we do define our maritime sector for the strategy as both commercial and recreational. So we do consider in the strategy the 83 recreational harbors that we have, almost $12 billion in economic impact, 45,000 jobs, and what is a key element of living in Michigan and visiting Michigan. So very important that we consider this. And depending on the year, Michigan usually is second or third in the nation for registered recreational boats. So that's very important to consider. And I think it's either 95 or 97% of these recreational boats are towable. So we need the vehicles that our auto industry is building to be able to bring those boats to the water. Also, want to just take a minute to talk about the importance of the Soo locks. If you've been to Sault Ste. Marie recently, there's major construction going on as a second lock is being built to provide some redundancy and additional capacity. It's even historically, if we're looking at during World War II, the locks were a strategic asset that was being protected in case of any kind of attack, just because of all the importance of the the materials coming from the north that are being transformed down here in Southeast Michigan and throughout the Great Lakes region. So just a really important bit of infrastructure that's part of our maritime sector. So kind of why are we doing this maritime strategy now? It's just a confluence of opportunities, both at the federal and state levels, that kind of showed us that it was time to take advantage of those and set ourselves up for the future. And the strategy builds on a foundation of existing plans, such as the Michigan Mobility 2045 plan, the carbon reduction strategy, the My Healthy Climate plan, and it aligns with the maritime priorities. It aligns maritime priorities with statewide goals for transportation. And it's also building on different initiatives that have been happening already. Our Department of Transportation has had the Maritime and Port Facility Grant Program that had a $5 million appropriation now a couple of years ago, created a grant program that was key into getting major federal investments in maritime in Michigan. And there's several workforce development programs for shipbuilding and ship parts manufacturing. We've had a very visible marine engineering program at the University of Michigan, some new types of fuels being developed at MSU. And I've pictured here the Michigan Maritime Manufacturing Initiative, M3, launched in July 2024 with a $50 million investment. And also talking about our Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity getting an $8 million federal grant to expand into marine manufacturing. And so it's all of these together made it that it was time to get together and make sure that all of us at the state, first of all, talk to each other about anything that has to do with maritime, but also be able to bring in partners from the industry and from academia and make sure that we're all connecting and talking. So how we did the strategy, my office provided a grant to the University of Michigan School of Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering to conduct the work. You can see Dr. Thomas McKinney conducting one of our sessions here on the picture. Some of you interested in maritime may have seen his name or presentations about several projects he's working on. And the main thing we did to develop a strategy is we listened. We met with a lot of people from the industry and we tried to capture as many good ideas as possible. And we've also had internally at the state interagency work group that was guiding the development, and we tried to involve as many as possible with our Department of Transportation, Labor and Economic Opportunity, Economic Development Corporation, our DNR, especially on the recreational side, Department of Natural Resources, pardon me, and other parts of my agency at EGLE. And we're in the very last bits of finishing the strategy. And so we're integrating the comments that were received during the public comment period that ended last month. And we're hopefully going to have this wrapped up in April. If not, it'll be right after that. So what's in the strategy? It's a 10-year forward-looking plan that also has a 5-year implementation plan. So we really want to make a check after 5 years. We also have yearly progress reports. And strategy is going to provide a framework to really leverage and improve Michigan's maritime assets, align state policies and strategies and plans. And we want to foster more collaboration in groups like the one that you are now and a lot of others, I think, are really realized that the way forward is to work together. So we're very excited to be leading that. The vision that we have for the strategy and for our state, as far as maritime goes, is that we want to lead the nation in sustainable, innovative, equitable, and collaborative maritime solutions, ensuring a robust maritime economy and a healthy Great Lakes ecosystem. Obviously, the Great Lakes are an extremely important part of our state, and anything that has to do with maritime still has to be done in a way that will protect and conserve our shared waters. So go through kind of summarizing in the words that are in the colorful blocks here. What are the 6 goals of the strategy? First of all, modernizing our infrastructure, both at ports and intermodal, realizing that a lot of first mile, last mile is really important to get to the ships that are docked. We want to grow the maritime manufacturing economy, accelerate the adoption of low emission vessel technologies and fuels when it makes sense. Want to lead the nation in recruitment, training, and retention of the maritime workforce. Hopefully, we can train more people, so we're either be able to shift from different modes when it's necessary, or just bring in more people in general into the industry. Very important as we're to look forward. It's important to cultivate a thriving innovation ecosystem. There's just a lot of good ideas in Michigan, and we want to keep doing that and pushing that into business development. And then finally, we want to make sure that, as I said previously, everything that we do will increase the sustainability, the resiliency, and the revitalization of recreational harbors and marinas to make sure that all of us get to benefit from investments. So I want to talk in the next few minutes for the majority of the rest of my presentation is, unfortunately, they're a little text-heavy slides, so I apologize for that on a Friday morning, but I wanted to talk about the recommendations that we have in our strategy, and I'll try to highlight 1 or 2 per slide. I don't want to go to everything. The PDF version that will be shared after the meeting is all the different recommendations, and also the strategy itself will have everything when we have the final one. We have over 50 recommendations. We have metrics that will track progress on each of those, and that's what we'll be reporting on every year. And our first goal is really to make a dent into modernizing our ports and investing in intermodal infrastructure. And so we want to do that to attract more trade partners, improve logistics, reduce costs, and be more efficient in general. And when we take advantage of different programs, especially at the federal level, to improve ports, it's not just repairing, it's preparing for the future and being more flexible. And the picture I think you have there is from the Port of Monroe that is investing over $30 million in a variety of different possibilities to have different cargoes, especially container ship, and they're also going to be having a customs system installed, which is a big deal to be able to bring in and out cargo. So we'll need collaboration and funding across federal, state, local levels, and our recommendations in this section really reflect that. Talking about investments in clean energy, before we really push that, we need to be able to know what we have and what we're emitting. My agency, the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, has received a $3 million grant from EPA to support port communities in their efforts to boost their efficiency and reduce carbon emissions. Program's not started yet, but we're developing it and kind of waiting for some paperwork to be completed. And so once we are able to do these kinds of inventories, we'll be able to help ports along in finding the right places where they can reduce their carbon emissions. Going into goal 2, growing our Michigan's maritime manufacturing economy. Kind of a bit similar to some of the supply chain things that Lisa was talking about in the auto world. We want to expand our supply chain and be able to support naval ship repair opportunities. That's one thing that we're hoping that our position, being inland, being further away from the coast, is something that can bring us some repairs to naval ships. We're looking right now, MEDC has done some supply chain mapping in the past. We want to make sure that we can match those who are ready when there's demand to find the right people and be able to produce what the market needs. And once again, going back to my point earlier about looking in the future with infrastructure, we want to make sure that what gets developed uses the latest technology available. And it's that technology aspect is also emphasized in the recent White House Maritime Action Plan that came out about a month ago. I'll touch on that a little bit later. And that really focuses on technology as well. And just talking about technology, Michigan in the Office of the Great Lakes has been a longtime supporter of the Smart Ships Coalition. We co-founded it with funding in 2018. And if you're not aware, at the Michigan Tech University in Houghton, the Great Lakes Research Center operates a test bed in Lake Superior where it is possible to test marine technology in pretty much every kind of water conditions. Obviously, they can also do it in the cold in the winter. So if you're in the maritime space and you need to test any equipment with a really innovative and wonderful group to work with, this is the place to do it. If you need to be connected, let us know. If not, you know where to find them. Right on the coast, very close to the bridge between the Houghton and Hancock. I want to go a little bit quicker on the zero emission vessels and fuels. So this goal is also realization that electrification may not be possible for all maritime equipment. There's great interest in Michigan for alternative fuels for both for ships and for land-based port equipment. In some cases, we grow what's needed in Michigan, we transform what's needed to make those fuels. And there's been great investment and interest also at the Port of Detroit to have biodiesel available for large ships, and it's been very successful. So want to continue that in collaboration with several organizations that are based in Michigan that are really doing a great job at developing those. And as I kind of alluded to, for some of the larger ships, it's not just about which fuel they use. There's room for other efficiency improvements. We're hoping to be able to use some of the data to reduce the time that's idling or control speed so that ships arrive to the Soo locks at the right time and don't have to wait and be wasting time in fuel, for example. And also going to the importance of ferries in Michigan, especially for islanders that live year-round on their islands, and it's very important for tourism too. They have shorter fixed routes, but also pretty rough seas in some areas. There's some regional studies that have been done, and so we want to build on that and stay in touch with our ferry programs and our ferry operators to see what can be done on that. And then finally, on the recreational side, there's opportunities to reduce the impacts of recreational boating and also make more of those boats in Michigan, excuse me. And so recreational boating is a very important industry and also impacts most of the time right at the shoreline where the majority of us are interacting with the lakes. And so that impact is very important there. But also, we also have great collaboration and participation in the development of strategy from the recreational industry. So we're very happy to have seen them be able to talk to us and bring us their insight. Getting into workforce, I'm glad to see a few of my Leo colleagues are here today. Maybe help me if some of the questions are more specific, but we have such a legacy and reputation in Michigan that we want to build on existing programs and in the especially for registered apprenticeships and other outreach in different school levels and really collaborating with employers and academic institutions to bring more awareness to careers in the maritime industries, how to train, how somebody can be trained, and what are the pathways to choose these careers and retain workers. And so another way that we're proposing the strategy to do this is in the form of a campaign. We've everybody, I think, knows Pure Michigan campaign on the tourism side, and maybe the recycling raccoons you may have seen as well. So we want to find the right way to raise awareness in an approachable way, in partnering with the industry and with education to build awareness, and also using programs that are already in some national maritime industry associations. Again, the important thing here is we have great systems in place. We do not want to necessarily recreate the wheel. It's more using what we have, the really smart people that are working on this, and emphasize their work and make it more visible. Then I've got 2 more goals remaining on maritime innovation is a very important thing as well. We're hoping to create and work with our federal partners to get maritime prosperity zone designation, and also taking advantage of some of the really innovative startups and hubs that we have in Michigan. Picture we have here is from New Lab in Detroit, where I feel like every time I get a chance to go there and talk to some of their folks, I get so energized with all the different ideas that are being developed and hopefully brought to market. So between the prosperity zones and also the Smart Ships Coalition and the testing that I was talking about earlier, try to smooth out any of that. That's going to be a little more work from the Office of Future Mobility Electrification, for example, and some of the work from MEDC as well. And then finally, this goal here really focuses on building existing tools and resources that we have developed. We want to support long-term sustainability and making sure, again, that that towns where tourism is a big part of the industry, that it's really an asset to the community, not just for those who are visiting or those who have the capacity to sail there on their own boat. And some of that is adjusting some of the funding for some of those programs, and protecting against the impacts of invasive species and pollution, and also making sure that there's access to the waterfront for all abilities. And then you can see here are one of the most efficient ways of controlling invasive species, with a towable boat being cleaned at a boating station, at a boating access site with a cleaning station. So that's one of the programs that has been very successful, and we want to continue upon it. So finally, how are we going to make this strategy happen? We have formed an interdepartmental implementation team, so that's a lot of agencies that work together to create the strategy. We're creating a process for continuing engagement and collaboration with industry and academia and communities, and we're working on identifying our short-term priorities, whether there are quick wins that we can have and drive progress towards implementation. And to help us in that, I do want to take a second to plug that the Office of the Great Lakes has been selected to be a host site for Michigan Mobility Fellow. So if you know of anybody in young professionals in your industry that would be interested in working with us to develop the maritime strategy, applications are open till the end of the month. And once I'm done presenting, I'll put the link in the chat. But we're really trying to push this opportunity to as many people as possible. And then, so finally, here's my contact information, QR code if you want to go read the strategy. I'm also going to put the link in the chat when I'm done presenting. Want to thank everybody for your time. Really appreciate being able to talk to all of you, and we'll be ready for questions.
Thank you, Simon. Very, a subject that's close to home for all of us who live in Great Lakes area. The first question I have is touches on the alignment between the strategy that you're developing and the White House Maritime Action Plan. What are the areas of alignment, and what might be some challenges between the two?
Thank you. the White House Maritime Action Plan came out about a month ago. Kind of was released on late Friday afternoon, so a few of us it took a minute for us to find it and be aware of it. But when we look past the way the documents are written in a very different way between our strategy and the way that plan is. There's a lot of common ground between the two when it comes to activities. Both plans want to focus on boosting existing programs. A lot of them talk about collaboration, and both of them talk a lot about workforce developments and workforce development and using actually several programs, especially I believe the apprenticeship programs are called out by the White House plan as well. And both are very systematic about maritime work and understanding that there's a lot to be done both from on the demand and working with the Navy. The one thing that's quite different is the White House plan is only about commercial and naval. They don't really talk about the recreational side. That's more of our which I think makes sense with the tone of the plans. But in general, there's a lot of and also the White House plan has some policy potential for funding a lot of this work, which will help some of the federal programs that we benefit from could get boosted, and then there's also an opportunity for us to provide some matching funds where it makes sense to really catalyze those investments.
Thank you. Just one other question is around the stakeholders and public. How can they get involved in supporting this? Specifically around a lot of people are on this call about training, workforce training as well.
So at this point, in the development process, as I mentioned, we've done already our public comment period. But if you are already working, especially if you're in the workforce development, you're already working with Leo and certain programs, reach out to them. If you need to be connected, reach out to me, and that's going to be the best way to link activities that you're doing and use the strategy to maybe to your advantage to push some of the ideas that you have. So it's connect with us at the state and let us know what you're doing.
Thanks, Simon. I'm going to kind of move to our next presenter, and if you can stay on, if we have time at the end, we probably have a few more questions. So our next presenter is Matt Bogoshian. Matt is the Executive Director of the American Manufacturing Communities Collaborative, a successor organization to the Obama administration's AMCC Economic Development Initiative that was focused on bottom-up efforts advancing American manufacturing. Matt is a thought leader. He's the host of the What's America's Purpose podcast. He's the co-founder of the for-profit enterprise Fourth Sector Group and has taught sustainability law at the University of California, Davis Law School, where he serves on the board of California Environmental Law and Policy Center. As a consumer and environmental prosecutor and then policy official at both the California EPA and the US EPA in Washington, D.C., Matt led numerous initiatives and taught at the Georgetown University Law Center. He began his service as a U.S. Navy JAG Corps officer, where he earned the Joint Service Commendation Medal in part for his work in international law. In business, he was a law firm business litigator and later the Chief Sustainability Officer for Rev, a sustainability services startup. So it's my pleasure to introduce Matt for the next presentation. Matt, take it away.
Hey, Frank, thank you so much. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Yeah. Well, it sounds like I couldn't hold the job. That's with that introduction. It's good to be on with everybody. So Matt Bogoshian, Executive Director of AMCC, and I'll introduce our Operations Director, David Van Siclen. A lot of folks know about AMCC. We're designated by the federal government, the Economic Development Administration, as the nation's manufacturing community of practice. So we're fired up to be connected with you all because you're really kind of carrying out kind of something that we, over the course of 15 years, have been working to encourage states and regions to develop their own, sector-based strategies. So this deck, which you guys can all get access to, we want to get to the conversation as quickly as possible because we have this thing called the Maritime Ecosystem Exchange, which is directly relevant to this great gathering and set of stakeholders. But the history matters because we're on this journey. The American project is what I'm talking about how do we strengthen the American project and the cornerstone of American manufacturing for producing priority products. So this story goes back to my years in DC after the Great Recession, when the president wanted all the different federal agencies, including mine, which I was at EPA, to focus on job creation. And so we got with all the top economists, and all the arrows looked pointed to strengthening the cornerstone of manufacturing for priority products. And so a lot of initiatives started at that time. You're probably familiar with the Manufacturing USA Institutes system. Well, here's another one, this IMCP program, which has led to so many of these regionally bottom-up, intervention efforts. And so there are evidence-based criteria about how manufacturers thrive. The bottom line, they need an ecosystem of support around them. Let's go on to the next slide, David, if you would. So we started this initiative for 2 years. We designated 24 regions around the country that really started to build those regional consortia. And after it sunsetted, the regions stayed together. We created AMCC as a national community of practice, all volunteers. And this is during the first Trump administration. And we're still kind of on the same thing in terms of the weakness of the defense industrial base. So we did some briefings on Capitol Hill. David Van Siclen, our operations director, was a key part of this, and many of the regional leaders from around the country. And DoD created a new program called the Defense Manufacturing Community Support Program. Ashley Breitner, who's on this call right now, honchos one from the University of Michigan. There are now 23 around the country. And it's an example of this kind of bottom-up intervention, federally supported but regionally led idea to strengthen the manufacturing ecosystem of support so that manufacturers of priority products can thrive. And so there's a lot of wonky economists and PhDs working in this space about how can we create interventions that are more predictive to the job creating and product creating and community lifting outcomes that we're trying to produce. So this was a step forward. And then in the next administration, the Biden administration, there was a whole slew of these bottom-up interventions. You know them by different labels: the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, the Tech Hub program, the NSF engines. They are all kind of these short-term, federally supported but regionally led consortia initiative around different criteria. But there's some commonality about the criteria, and the commonality is that you need the ecosystem of support around, the product producers to be stronger. And so we really have taken this evidence-based approach to how do you kind of understand your ecosystem of support, and how do you, reduce the barriers or the gaps that are in your ecosystem so you can produce priority products. Along the way, our merry band got designated as the nation's manufacturing community of practice to bring this evidence-based approach to bear. And so two easy things to learn more about AMCC. They're free. Every week we have a national Monday call David can set you up to join that call. I think some of you already participate in that weekly 30-minute call. It's a no-brainer to join that. And at the end of every week, we have an AMCC update newsletter that goes out that's fueled by all these practitioners around the country that are trying to carry out this bottom-up evidence-based approach to producing priority products in their regions. Now, the cool part with you guys is like you're one of the leading states in kind of identifying this approach. I mean, looking at your state strategy for maritime, very cool. We've encouraged that kind of sector, state for the state government to lean governments, I should say, to lean in more on industrial policy making. So hats off to Michiganders for doing that. One of the things we do this annual summit that came out about a year and a half ago is folks are saying, hey, do your AMCC thing, but for the maritime industry. And so we partnered with the National Association of Manufacturers and created this national maritime ecosystem exchange is what we call it. But basically it's 2 meetings a month with stakeholders that matter. National stakeholders, we have all these federal interventions that are pre-existing and new ones. The previous speaker was talking about, the Maritime Action Plan from the administration and what's kicking around in the Ships Act, these maritime prosperity zones, pretty cool. We talk about that in our Maritime Ecosystem Exchange that you guys can join. It's again, like the AMCC regular calls, this Maritime Ecosystem Exchange calls are free. David, why don't you come on, introduce yourself and tell folks, how they can get plugged into this. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And hi, everyone. David Van Siclen. I'm AMCC's operations director. Like Matt said, we've been building this exchange for about a year now. So anyone who's on this call with an interest, or if you have any partners or colleagues who you think would benefit from participating, please just reach out to us. I can give a little bit more background, or we can, hold a meeting or two. I think that it's a really timely discussion, especially for everyone on this call, because we're seeing a lot of this confluence of different factors that are suggesting the federal government will be increasing its investment and more targeted direction around the maritime industrial base, not only in a defense and Navy context, but also to commercial shipbuilding. And I think we should also talk about the last speaker's point around the recreational use in this maritime sector. But we did, like Matt said, have a meeting just 2 weeks ago about the Ships Act and the Maritime Action Plan. We had leaders from Washington, D.C. come speak to how they're talking about their programs, what the legislative horizon looks like, and a lot of other helpful discussion points that I think many people on this call would benefit from. So I've already put my contact information in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to us. All of this work that we're describing is open to practitioners just like yourself to engage with and engage with other regions around the country. I also shared a link at the start of our presentation of an overview of the Maritime Action Plan. So feel free to grab that. If you want to redistribute it or share it yourself, you're more than welcome to. We're really trying to bring all of these regions along together as best we can. Back to you, Matt.
Yeah. So thanks, David. And it is big, but you guys, because you guys are organized, the rest of the country needs to learn from you too. And that's one of the things that we can do at AMCC is elevate the good hard work that Michigan is doing. And then you can share best practices with other jurisdictions. That's what really happens a lot on the AMCC platform and in this Maritime Ecosystem Exchange. So think of like on what topics? Okay, workforce, that's one. Tech transfer is another. Supply chain is another. We have our own PhD who has helped create this manufacturing intelligence platform to inform kind of the assessment of regional ecosystems of support to see, how Michigan and your maritime region is shaping up with the public data. There's tons of public data out there about our kind of manufacturing ecosystem, but it's not woven together in any kind of useful fashion for stakeholders like you guys. And so we, with a whole slew of folks, have tried to work on that. And this PhD at Carnegie Mellon, who's connected to our team, created this ecosystem assessment tool. And so anyway, that's the kind of tools and tactics that you guys can benefit from. We're free. David just dropped a sneak peek of that platform. It's under construction, but anybody that wants to check it out, you can check out your jurisdiction. It goes down to the county level with all this really important assessment data around that. The big 6 elements of what we've learned over 15 years are critical parts of the ecosystem of support around manufacturing. So we're throwing a lot at you. Just know, participating with AMCC, the water's warm, it's free. You can join the 2 weekly calls, which are, for manufacturing in general, but then this maritime ecosystem exchange is specifically, focused on the maritime sector. Those are 2 calls a month. And we're happy to have offline meetings and stuff. We have to drop, or I do have to drop at the bottom of the hour here, but I want to have a few minutes, Frank, if there's questions or whatever. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. By the way, the water is not really that warm in Michigan. Anyway, you touched on some of the best practices that Michigan share. What about the relationship between public and private sector in Michigan? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's critical. I mean, that's part of these coalitions we're trying to learn. It's, trust is the coin of the realm. And so when you go around, the country, what you see is that there's not a lot of trust. And so these consortia initiatives are engendered to build those kinds of relationships, Frank, so that there is trust. These manufacturers can't do it on their own. They don't know what they don't know. And likewise, the kind of ecosystem of support providers, whether they be in workforce or tech transfer or supply chain or whatever, don't have kind of as much insight into what the manufacturers demands are. And so, you got to get them together, share information. I think Michigan's, and we've dealt with Ashley a bit, especially recently around her defense manufacturing community. And then we have long relationships with some folks in Michigan going back to that IMCP initiative going way back. And you guys have such a long history of awesome manufacturing. I think you guys are poised to be in a good position, with a deep bench of expertise. Nonetheless, this world moves fast. And so I think having your state government lean in, like I said at the outset, is super important. Maritime is obviously going to be where, you're skating back to the ice in Michigan there, Frank. Skating to where the puck is going to be is important. And it seems like with this strategy, you're doing that, so that's what I got to say on that. Yeah.
Thanks. Regarding the role that MAGMA, our organization, can play, especially around shipbuilding and maritime manufacturing, how do you think we can identify opportunities as well as help progress this or support this?
Well, it's a no-brainer. Participate in this maritime ecosystem exchange that David and I have been talking about. It's a work in the Feds are a work in progress. They always have been. It's not this administration, it's every administration. We don't have it figured out. We're so fragmented in this country, Frank. But the signs are good. David was talking about this, call that we had a bunch of folks from Capitol Hill on the call of the Maritime Ecosystem Exchange, and they are describing what they want to have come out in this bipartisan bicameral Ships Act. And the last speaker was talking about these maritime prosperity zones where they want to have 100 of them. If that thing gets passed, you guys, be thinking about, all right, we're a good spot for a maritime prosperity zone or zones. What does that look like? The Feds need to know how to actually implement that. And so that's a feedback opportunity for Michigan. and Michiganders to say, hey, you know what? If you're going to put some scaffolding on this general idea of what a maritime prosperity zone is, do it this way. And then you guys would be poised to actually get some of that federal support. David?
Yeah, I want to add one thing to what you were saying, Matt. You know, a lot of the work that we'll do here at AMCC is really talking about how do regions make smart strategic decisions based on the different assets and stakeholders they get together, right? And I think one of the benefits of having a group like MAGMA is you're convening industry, workforce, public stakeholders, bringing them all together to do that prioritization work. So for the AMCC side, at least, we have this theory of change, which I'd love to share very quickly, if that's all right. And it's really talking about how do we take this complex problem of revitalizing manufacturing and start thinking about which regions can prioritize different strategies in different areas towards a common goal that we all like to achieve. So for us, it's first you got to focus on, okay, what are our priority industries? Let's look at our assets in our state and what we can, you know, really execute on. These 6 industries, they're huge, they're overlapping, but they're also the industries we know will need to be operating sufficiently through the 21st century for the U.S. to maintain a competitive edge. And it's not just supporting manufacturers operating in these industries, but it's also trying to bring all of the new technology that we're seeing, Industry 4.0, artificial intelligence, energy efficiency, and the like, to these manufacturers to improve their bottom line, to improve their efficiency, and to unlock new capabilities that perhaps they couldn't do before from their traditional methods. After focusing on which industries and what technologies are you prioritizing in your region, then we really need to talk about what Matt has been describing, this big 6, right? This ecosystem framework. Manufacturers care about all 6 of these things, but they don't have the bandwidth to do every single one of them, especially small and mid-sized manufacturers. They need a lot of support from the ecosystem. That's a lot of stakeholders on this call in order to make good on some of their needs, right? And everyone here on the call, this will probably resonate with you. It's workforce, it's R&D leading entrepreneurship, it's infrastructure, it's supply chains, trade, international investment, capital access, and operational improvement to upgrade your facilities. We need an ecosystem of actors around the manufacturer to be operating sufficiently well so that all of these things succeed for the manufacturers in an area. And to build on that, it's not just manufacturers, it's not just workforce, not just economic development, it's all these different roles that we need. You know, we need lawyers, we need administrative folk, we need state agencies, we really need a village to start moving some of these big challenges towards a systems level change. And then the last pillar for us is, you know, what are we shooting for? For us, it's sustainable development, which we think is articulated very well in the CHIPS and Science Act. These 5 bullets are linked directly to our national, social, and geostrategic challenges that the CHIPS Act sought to address. And we think that in general, this is a very good North Star we should be shooting towards in our manufacturing sectors. And what do we do at AMCC? What I think MAGMA is doing and what I think this group can really continue leaning into are these 5 things about how we advance systems change, right? What we're doing right now is relationship building. We'd love to have everyone on this call participate in AMCC and some of our no-cost activities so we can learn to meet each other, understand what each other's doing, try to look for some bigger strategies together. We've got to tell the story of manufacturing, both specific regions and the nation as a whole. Then we have to develop those strategies and actions that lead to what we really need in this country, which are larger structures to do this work in a more durable sense, because we have all this intermittent funding. And as Matt's talking about, we have all this fragmentation amongst all of our different players. We really need to be coming up with these large structures so we can do really big things in this country again. So I just wanted to share that because I think that might be helpful, because I see MAGMA being an important role for bringing some of this, a framework similar to this, towards some of Michigan's objectives.
Thanks, David, and thanks all. I got to drop off, but David, hopefully you can stay on a little bit for further questions. Thanks all. Appreciate it, and look forward to being connected and working with you guys.
Thanks, Matt. David, as you know, Michigan is one of the automotive centers in the world, and what are some of the adjacencies, both from a workforce standpoint and also training standpoint, that can be found between automotive and the maritime, as you see.
I'm sorry, Frank, that's not my specialty on the workforce side. I don't think
Okay,
that I can
sorry
answer
about
that question well.
All right. Let's go on the manufacturing. Are there any questions online?
I'm not seeing any, but if anyone has any questions for any of the speakers, please drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we would be happy to answer them. We'll give it a few seconds. If it's easier for you to raise your hand and come off mute, I'm happy to do that as well. So you can raise your hand and ask a question. All right, hearing none, I think we can bring up all the speakers and thank them tremendously for all the information they just shared. It was a lot of mobility insights from EV to hybrid to hydrogen, who knows, right? To maritime. And I will pass it over to Frank or Oliver if they have any other final thoughts or comments before we close today's meeting.
Just from my standpoint, Simon, Lisa, David, thank you for your participation. I think there were some great data and information as well as some insights shared with the team.
Yeah, and I'd like to personally thank all the speakers for these really insightful comments, really delightful presentations. Simon, to your point, this is not just automobiles, this is Michigan, so you're all very welcome here.
And then I would be remiss if when people are leaving, I'm going to throw a link in our chat for the June 5th MAGMA Advisory Committee. It will be hosted in person. We would love to see you on the campus of University of Michigan. So once again, our MAGMA Governing Board, Ashley, is on the call and she will be hosting us. This is hot off the presses, more promotion to come, but it will be around drones and unmanned aerials. So please join us if you can sign up. Promotion hasn't even started for that, so you're first to hear it here. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your first day of spring, and hopefully it warms up a little bit more in Michigan, so our waters can get a little warmer, as Matt said.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
And thanks again, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All the best.
Outstanding. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Alicia. Take care. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, you too. Lots of stuff to digest, right?
Yes.
After